Yo, it's the Fields Bros. So we have to talk about the Death Note one shot now that we've actually had a chance to read it. And it's been, February 4th, so it's been a couple of weeks. So we've had some time to resonate on it. But first things first, let's talk about some of the things that we said, that we predicted would happen, some of the things that we were right about, some things that we were wrong about. First off, I remember saying that I thought that this would not be a permanent user of the notebook in this Tanaka kid. And it turns out that this kid gets killed in this one shot. He's already dead. I thought Nier would catch the new owner of the notebook fast, is what I said. It's exactly what I said. And I was basing that off of the fact that I assumed that Tanaka was going to be actually using the notebook, using its killing power. I didn't assume he was only going to be just selling. So the fact that he's not using the notebook for its killing power is going to make him much harder to find if he's just selling it. But I've already thought of a way that Nier could, even though this kid's dead, I've already thought of a way that Nier could isolate certain events and possibly figure out that this kid was auction cured. What else did I say? I said that the Ryuk mannequin gets destroyed and it just explodes. I speculated possibly because Ryuk might have smashed it. No, that's not what happened. Nier had a little self-destruct button installed inside of the Shinigami mannequin thing. And once they were discussing tracking the Shinigami, but once they realized that not only is the Shinigami just an invisible man type dude, but he can also pass through material, physical material objects. Like he can just walk through floors and walk, straight through the ground. So after they realized that, they'd given up on their plans to try to track a Shinigami. So he just, blew up the idea by pushing that button. But yeah, the notebook gets sold. There's a whole auction for this thing. You have governments bidding for this for Kira's killing power. The way they do it is the owner of the notebook, Tanaka, he uses Sakura TV to his advantage, but because it's a technological era, you can't just walk there. There's cameras everywhere. He just decides, all right, I'll just have Ryuk take the notebook to the TV news station, and he holds up and he has a pen and paper and he writes on the pen and paper that Kira's ability to remotely kill people from any location is being put up for auction. Any party wishing to bid, place your bid at this certain Twitter feed, whatever, in American dollars. And Ryuk's just holding this paper in front of the camera during a live news feed. Obviously, it's just invisible. It's just a piece of paper floating for most people. But you have Tanaka watching at his house, on his bed, on his iPod, on his cell phone, watching the news feed, and obviously he can see Ryuk, and obviously the other people that are involved in this Kira case can see Ryuk as well. Matsuda, the SBK, etc. And basically, it turns into this giant auction. It gets to the point where you have countries, bidding for the not the notebook per se, but Kira's power. Obviously, the notebook is Kira's power, but they're not publicizing that it's a notebook. They're just talking about that it's definitely Kira's power, and it ends up going to the United States as the highest bidder. So here's where it gets interesting. The SPK, during this process, they were talking about how Nier was talking about how he wanted to meet the person selling the notebook, auction here. But here's the problem here. Once the USA agreed to buy it, and Tanaka, all right, he told Ryuk, okay, I'm good with that. I want you to take the notebook to the President of the United States. But before he does, he tells Ryuk not to contact him again for any reason, no matter what the circumstances may be. And that's what he agrees to do. So the kid forfeits ownership of the book. He gives it back to Ryuk, and then Ryuk proceeds to, he's supposed to go take it to the president. But right before this happens, the night before, while Tanaka was asleep, another Shinigami appeared in Tanika's room. It was the jeweled out, decked out Shinigami, the Harmonia Justin dude. The dude who's decked out in gold. He just comes flying in. Tanika's obviously asleep. In the one shot, you can see the Z's above his head. And this Shinigami tells Ryuk that the king has summoned him back. As soon as he's able to visit the king, he needs to do so. So, as soon as Ryuk, he's bound until the notebook is, until the kid forfeits ownership. Like we just talked about a moment ago. The kid forfeits ownership, and at that point, before he goes to the president to take it to the buyer, he has to go back to the Shinigami Rule, and he goes there. And apparently, the Shinigami King is making a new rule change. He's adding a rule to the notebook saying that the notebook cannot be sold or purchased in the human world. And the buyer and sellers are automatically killed once they receive payment and or receive the notebook. So at that point, Ryuk's in the Oval Office. He's letting the president touch the book. And he's explaining that to him. Very obviously, the president's he's extremely confused. He has no idea what he's talking about. But the president basically tells the president that if you accept this book, you're going to be killed. But if you refuse to accept it, then I'll consider that you didn't purchase it, and I won't kill you, basically. So the president says he doesn't want it, all right? But he says he's going to act as if he's obtained it, because the whole world just had this auction for it. So, as far as the world, and he already said he wasn't going to use it. So as far as the world's concerned, the USA has just purchased this ability. So he's going to, he's not going to use it, he says. But basically, you just paid, what did they pay? $2 trillion? Basically, you just paid all this money to learn about the existence of the notebook and have a meeting basically with Ryuk. That's what all this money basically purchased. And the rest of the world is convinced you have this ability. But then Ryuk takes the book back with him and he leaves. And then on the last panel, you see Ryuk. Or excuse me, I guess we should go to what happens with Tanika first. Once, because like I said, the buyer dies once they receive the book, which the president did not want, and the seller dies when they receive the money. Now, the money's been arranged to be distributed to the Yotsuba group and be divvied down to all these millions of shareholders, all right, in Japan. So you have all these people inheriting, just getting all this money, basically. And Tanika is one of the people with bank shareholding, that has shares at this Yotsuba bank. It's arranged for like a month later, which he was aware of. But what happens was there's a panel, and you can see that this kid's on the ground dead. He had a heart attack, and there's money all over the ground. So like as soon as he went to withdraw that money and touched it, he was killed. And you can see Ryuk right above on the panel on top of the freaking Yotsuba bank. It says right there. He's sitting right on top of the freaking thing. And you see this kid's name written right below Light Yagami's name. So it's very clear Ryuk hung around until the kid got the money like he was ordered, and he killed him. Now, and that's pretty much where this ends with that final panel of Ryuk having both notebooks. Ryuk obviously has his notebook, which has Light's name and Tanika's name, the one that's always strapped in that cross buckle type thing that he has on his waist. And he has this other notebook now, the one that the president didn't want, the one that Auction Kira just had, the one that Midra Seikira's Shinigami gave back to Ryuk. So that's the notebook that this is right here. So basically, there's a free notebook. Ryuk he was sitting there saying that isn't there anybody who could use this notebook for longer than that? And that's where the notebook ends, or that's where the one shot ends. It ends with the president being in the public eye has obtained Kira's power from the public perspective, and you have Ryuk still looking for an owner at this point. So that's pretty much part one of this review. Part two is coming up right now. Now that we're at the 10-minute mark, we're just going to have a double video. So for part 2, we're going to talk about how, alright, now that this Tanaka kid is dead, how could Nier possibly figure out, like, obviously you might think it's not important at this point, but Nier was saying how he wanted to find out who Auction Kira was while he was still alive. Now that he's dead, is it even possible to figure out who he was, and is it even relevant? And the answer is yes, it is possible. Number one, consider how, back in the original Deathnote case, how was L able to figure out where, the Kira case began, basically? He used heart attack deaths. In that case, there was certain heart attack deaths only occurring in Japan, a very high concentration of heart attack deaths. That's what, alerted L to the area. In this case, like I said, this Tanaka kid was killed of a heart attack because of this new rule that he sold the book that the king made up on the spot, basically, that Ryuk had to enforce. So here's the thing. Let's say Nier, alright, he knows where this money is going to be going to. Alright, the payment's going to this Yotsuba bank, and Auction Kira, by default, is one of the millions or whatever of shareholders, hundreds of thousands, whatever, X amount of shareholders. He's one of those accounts belongs to Auction Kira, in other words. But here's the thing. Out of all the people who received money from this Kira auction notebook debacle thing, how many of those people do you think died of heart attacks on that day? Probably not too many. It's pretty unlikely that somebody would have a heart attack from the excitement of getting the money. So, like I said, this is freaking Deathnote. Heart attacks are your indicator that something is up. So what if Nier looks at, alright, out of all the people who received money, let's say 2 people died, just to add an extra person, because it'd be very simple if it was just Tanaka as the only shareholder who had a heart attack that day. Let's just say there's 2. There's one other person. So out of all the hundreds of thousands of people that received money that day, only 1 or 2 people, one for sure, we know that kid died. So only 1 kid died, per se. And so Nier's going to look at this kid, let's just say, and he's like, all right, it's a young kid. He's the top, intelligence score in Japan, very similar to Light. So let's just say that Nier's like, all right, is it possible that this kid could have been Auction Kira? What else could he possibly go on? We already know that he can see Ryuk. We already know that there's cameras everywhere in Japan in every corner at this point. There's definitely cameras at and around that bank that they're at. So Ryuk was right at that bank when he killed the Tanaka kid. So I'm pretty sure if you had cameras like from around that bank, you could definitely spot Ryuk around that bank somewhere. Pretty much confirming that he's the one that he killed the person there. And even furthermore, even if let's say Nier, alright, so you take that kid's name, you figure out what school he went to. Or actually, scratch that. Ryuk didn't hang around with this kid at school. He only visited him at the playground once in 2017, and he revisited him later in 2019. When all this is supposed to be happening. But my point is, all you have to do is try to find Ryuk hanging around this kid on camera somewhere, if that's possible. And the most likely place would be at that day at the bank when everybody received the payment, and that kid had a heart attack and died right there on the spot. If Nier could possibly see camera footage of Ryuk at the bank at that moment the kid died, that pretty much would confirm it in his mind that, all right, that was Auction Kira, basically, because he's the only one who had a heart attack death on the day everybody received the payment. But this still doesn't really address what Ryuk, the bigger issue. What's going to happen with this notebook now? Ryuk's looking for somebody who can be a long-term user. Obviously, I speculated that Nier would be very capable. He fits the criteria in terms of the mental level that Ryuk's looking for. But then again, Nier might just be, his role of L might be just too necessary to break. Like, Ryuk might be counting on the fact of Nier's existence and catching a new Kira. Because it's going to be extremely difficult for someone to just make use of the book's killing power to a higher degree than Light was able to. Especially with Nier on the scene now, is developed as intelligent as he's become. But I still think it would be cool, even if Ryuk somehow visited Nier and contacted him somehow, even if Nier doesn't use the book, just some type of confrontation encounter between those two would be pretty interesting. Those are clearly the two most popular characters in the show at this point. But like, let's just say if somebody else gets this book from Ryuk, now that America has been, set up as the people who have it, now somebody else could almost discreetly use a book and blame it on the Americans at this point. Wouldn't you say that's possible? Because even though the President of the United States doesn't have the Death Note per se, he does have knowledge of it. He knows what the Death Note is, and he has seen a Shinigami. Like I said, that's what that money pretty much bought you. It bought you a proxy Kira, pretty much. Your country gets to act as if they have the book, and you have gained awareness of what's really going on in this Death Note world. And this also leads to the fact that this Death Note knowledge could be recorded now in history. Even though it could be recorded now at this point. People could take notes. People could write down, all right, this exists. Like, if the President of the United States has, in this case, special notes that could now be passed down from person to person. Like they say in the one shot that in 2005 or 6 or whatever it was, that the president at the time was testified by the FBI director at the time, and a boy named Nier testified to the President of the United States at that time about what the Death Note was, what Kira's power was at that point. I don't know if they knew about the Shinigami at that point, but they definitely know about it now, and they definitely know about the notebook at that point then and now. So, in closing, how would Light Yagami feel about this new Death Note user, Tanaka, and what he did? Light would probably think this kid is a fucking retard. I hope I'm allowed to swear, because what was the number one thing Light did not want to do? What was the number one thing he tried to do? Keep the Death Note a secret. Think about when the second Kira in the first case was talking about, having the eyes, discreetly in public messages, and how that made Light feel, talking about Shinigami eyes in a message the whole world could see. Now you're just selling Kira's power around the world like it's something that can be purchased. And the level of awareness at this point about Kira's ability has reached dangerously high levels, to the point where you have the Shinigami King making new rules on the spot, because we don't, the notebook's supposed to be given away. You're not supposed to be, like I said, you're only supposed to use it for its killing power. It's supposed to kill people. It's not supposed to be used in any other way but that. But at this point, the one wild card would be more Shinigami coming to the human world like before. Say another Shinigami. I don't think we need 2 or 3 more, but there was Ryuk and Ram as the primary ones. You could easily write in another Shinigami at this point. So we're going to leave it at that. I'm going to have another video for sure once I think of more possible paths, directions that the series could take in terms of an actual anime or manga series. But thanks for listening, guys. Please comment, add your thoughts in the comment section later.